The emergency session had been going for 3 hours and nobody was listening anymore. Delegates from 47 different species shouted over each other in the grand chamber while holographic displays showed the same horrifying images on repeat. Entire planets reduced to gray dust, ships torn apart like paper, colonies that had stood for thousands of years simply gone. Neil Barrett sat in the human section, watching it all fall apart. He had been Earth's ambassador for only 6 months. Long enough to learn how the Galactic Assembly worked, but not long enough to understand why everyone seemed so ready to give up. The other humans in his delegation looked to him for answers, but he had none yet. "Order!" Talus called out from the central platform. The tall, bird-like speaker raised all 4 wings, and the chamber reluctantly quieted. His feathers, usually bright gold, had turned dull gray with stress. "We have the survey results. The Scourge has consumed 17 worlds in 40 days. At current speed, it will reach the core territories in less than a year." A reptilian commander named Ron stood, his scales dark green and weathered from decades of service. "The Confederacy fleet proposes immediate evacuation of all inner spiral populations. We move everyone to the outer rim and establish new colonies beyond the barrier nebula." "Agreed," said another delegate. This one from an aquatic species whose name Neil could never pronounce correctly. "Our people are already preparing transport ships." One by one, species after species voted to abandon their homes. Neil watched the tally board light up with green approval markers. The vote was not even close. 46 votes in favor of total evacuation. 0 against. 1 abstention, marked in yellow next to Earth's symbol. Talus turned his large darts toward Neil. "Ambassador Barrett, humanity has abstained? Do you wish to explain?" The chamber fell silent. Thousands of eyes in dozens of different shapes and colors focused on the small human delegation. Neil stood slowly, feeling the weight of every stare. He was a crisis negotiator back on Earth, trained to stay calm when everyone else panicked. But this was different. This was not one building with hostages. This was an entire galaxy preparing to run. "Speaker Talus, honored delegates," Neil began, keeping his voice steady. "Earth recognizes the severity of this threat. We have reviewed all available data on the Scourge. We understand the danger. Then you vote in favor of evacuation?" Ron asked, sounding hopeful. "No," Neil said. "Humanity will remain. We will establish defensive positions in the inner territories and do everything we can to slow the Scourge advance." The chamber erupted. Delegates jumped to their feet, shouting in languages that the translation devices struggled to keep up with. Talus had to call for order 3 more times before anyone could hear anything. "This is madness," Ron shouted. "Your species has been part of this assembly for less than 10 years. You have 40 ships, maybe 50? The Scourge is infinite. You will die for nothing." Neil nodded slowly. "Maybe, but there are millions of people in the inner territories who cannot evacuate. The old, the sick, the young. Those who live on worlds without space-worthy vessels. Your evacuation plan leaves them behind." "There is no choice," Talus said, and for the first time, Neil heard genuine pain in the speaker's voice. "We cannot save everyone. We can only save those who can run." "That is your choice," Neil replied. "It is not ours. Humanity has learned hard lessons about abandoning people. 50 years ago, we lost colonies to solar flares because we decided some lives were not worth the cost of saving. We will not make that mistake again." A young avian, barely old enough to have full feathers, approached from the administrative section. His name was Pip, and he worked as a clerk for the assembly. "Ambassador Barrett, forgive me, but I must ask. Your military analysis must show that you cannot win. So why fight?" Neil looked at the young alien and saw genuine confusion, not mockery. "Because, Pip, someone has to try. If we can slow them down, even for a few weeks, that is a few more weeks for refugees to escape. If we can study their tactics, maybe we find a weakness. And, if we cannot do either of those things, at least the people we protect will know that someone stood with them at the end." The chamber had gone quiet again, but this time it was different. Not the silence of agreement, but the silence of people who did not understand what they were hearing. Talos stepped down from his platform and approached Neil directly. It was a breach of protocol, but nobody stopped him. Ambassador, I have led this assembly for 30 years. I have seen species rise and fall. I have never seen anyone choose certain death with such clarity. Is this truly the will of your entire species? It is, Neil said. Earth's government voted unanimously. Our military volunteered before they were even asked. We are not a large species, Speaker Talos, and we are not the strongest. But we know what it means to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Talos studied him for a long moment, then made a gesture that, in his culture, meant respect for the dead. Then humanity will die with honor. The assembly will remember your sacrifice. Maybe, Neil said quietly. Or maybe we will surprise you. Over the next 3 days, the assembly chamber emptied. Ship after ship departed, carrying entire civilizations toward the outer rim. Neil watched from the observation deck as the great vessels vanished into faster-than-light jumps, leaving trails of light that faded into darkness. Pip found him there on the final day. The young avian was supposed to leave with the last administrative convoy, but his ship had departed early due to mechanical issues. He would have to wait for the next transport in 2 weeks. Ambassador, why do humans do this? Pip asked. Everyone says you are either very brave or very stupid. I do not understand which one is true. Neil smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. Can I tell you a secret, Pip? We are terrified. Every single human heading toward that fight is scared out of their mind. But fear is not a good enough reason to abandon people who need help. But you will die. Probably, Neil agreed. But maybe, just maybe, we will buy enough time for people like you to survive. That has to be worth something. Below them, the first human warships began moving toward the inner territories. They were small compared to the massive assembly vessels, but they moved with purpose. 37 ships against an enemy that had consumed worlds. Pip watched them go, and whispered something in his own language. The translator rendered it as, the small birds who fly toward the storm. Neil nodded. Yeah, that sounds about right. The last of the assembly ships jumped away, and the station fell silent. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the scourge was coming. And for the first time in galactic history, someone was moving forward to meet it. Humanity had made its choice. Now came the hard part. Grace Okonkwo had commanded naval vessels for 23 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The refugee convoy stretched across 3,000 kilometers of space, hundreds of mismatched ships limping toward safety at speeds that made her want to scream. Families, medical transports, ancient cargo haulers converted into passenger vessels. All of them moving too slowly, and all of them directly in the path of what was coming. Ma'am, we have visual confirmation, her communications officer reported. The Scourge will reach Outpost Talos in 16 hours. Grace studied the tactical display. Talos was a mining colony built into a large asteroid, home to 40,000 refugees who had been deemed unable to continue the evacuation. Too old, too sick, too young, or simply too poor to afford passage on the faster ships. The Galactic Assembly had marked it as an acceptable loss. Grace had marked it as her line in the sand. All ships, this is Okonkwo. We hold position at Talos and prepare defensive positions. I want firing solutions on every approach vector and evacuation routes mapped for the civilians. Her second officer, a young man named Peters, looked up from his console. Commander, we have 37 ships against an enemy that destroyed a Confederacy battle group in 4 minutes. Our orders were to observe and report, not engage. Our orders were garbage, Grace said flatly. We did not come out here to watch people die. We came to give them a chance. Relay the defensive plan to all vessels. The human fleet moved into position around Talos like a protective shell. It was not much. 17 destroyers, 12 frigates, 6 support vessels, and 2 heavy cruisers that had seen better days. But it was what they had, and it would have to be enough. Grace, took a transport down to the colony itself to coordinate with the ground forces. Sergeant Ben Keller met her at the landing bay, his face covered in dust from setting up defensive positions in the mining tunnels. "Commander, good to see you," Ben said, offering a tired salute. "We have been moving refugees into the deep shelters. Problem is, we have 40,000 people and shelter space for maybe 25,000. Then we make the space bigger," Grace said. "How much explosive do you have access to?" Ben grinned. It was not a happy expression. "Ma'am, this is a mining colony. We have enough charges to crack a small moon." "Good, expand those shelters and reinforce the entrances. I want every civilian 3 kilometers underground by the time that thing arrives. And Ben, I need your Marines ready for close defense. If any of those things get past my ships, you are the last line." "Understood, ma'am. We will hold." Grace returned to her flagship, a heavy cruiser called the Singapore. It was old, built before humanity even knew aliens existed, but it was tough and it was hers. The crew worked with quiet efficiency, running final checks on weapon systems that had never been designed to face anything like the Scourge. An insectoid administrator named Iris contacted her from the colony. Her translation came through with clicking sounds beneath the words. "Commander Okonkwo, I must ask why you do this. Your species owes us nothing. These refugees are not your people." Grace looked at the image of Iris on her screen. The alien's compound eyes showed no emotion that Grace could read, but her voice carried something that might have been fear. "Administrator Iris, I have a question for you. If you saw a child drowning, would you help them even if they were not your child?" "Of course," Iris replied without hesitation. "Then you understand exactly why we are here," Grace said. "There is no difference between one child and 40,000 people. If we can help, we help. It is really that simple." 8 hours before the Scourge arrived, the fleet completed its defensive preparations. Grace had positioned her ships in a layered formation, using the asteroid field around Talus as natural cover. Ben had wired the larger asteroids with mining charges, turning them into improvised mines. It was not elegant, but it might work. "All ships report ready," Peter said. "Weapon systems hot, shields at maximum. We are as prepared as we are going to be." Grace nodded and opened a fleet-wide channel. "This is Okonkwo to all vessels. In a few hours we are going to face something that has destroyed everything in its path. I will not lie to you. We will probably not survive this. But those 40,000 people down there will survive, because we are going to buy them the time they need to get deep enough underground. Every minute we hold is another minute they have to reach safety. Every shot we fire is one less shot aimed at civilians. We are not here to win. We are here to give them a chance. All ships, stand ready." The Scourge arrived early. It came through the outer asteroid field like a wave of living darkness. The sensor readings made no sense. Organic matter fused with mechanical components, ships that grew like tumors from a central mass, weapons that seemed to fire biological projectiles that ate through shields and hull plating alike. It was not a fleet. It was a single massive organism that happened to be the size of a small moon. "All ships, weapons free," Grace ordered. "Target the leading edge and fire everything." The human fleet opened up with everything they had. Missiles, railgun rounds, energy weapons, and old-fashioned explosive shells. The barrage lit up the darkness like a small sun. For a moment, Grace thought they might actually hurt it, then the Scourge fired back. 3 ships vanished in the first volley, simply torn apart by projectiles that seemed to hunt their targets. The destroyer Halifax broke in half, her crew lost before they could even send a distress call. The frigate Cairo managed to launch her escape pods before she exploded. "Evasive maneuvers," Grace shouted. "Activate Protocol Defiance." Protocol Defiance was humanity's answer to fighting something bigger and stronger. If you could not win through force, you won through stubbornness. The human ships stopped fighting like a coordinated fleet and started fighting like individual predators. They darted in and out of the asteroid field, using the rocks as cover, leading the Scourge's weapons into Ben's carefully placed charges. The first asteroid, Mine detonated directly in the path of a scourge tendril. And for the first time, the thing actually recoiled. A cheer went up across the fleet channels. "It can be hurt," Peters shouted. "Then hurt it more," Grace ordered. "All ships, lead that thing into the minefield. Make it chase you." For 2 hours, the human fleet played the most dangerous game of tag in galactic history. Ships would dart out, fire everything they had, then race back into the asteroids with pieces of the scourge following. Ben detonated charge after charge, each explosion carving chunks out of the pursuing mass, but it was not enough. The scourge was too big, too adaptable. It learned their tactics, started avoiding the obvious traps, began splitting into smaller pieces that hunted individual ships. The fleet was down to 21 vessels, and the colony still needed another hour. Grace made her decision. Singapore to all ships. Fall back to the secondary line. We are going to give them their hour. "Commander, if we fall back, you will be alone," Peters said. "I know," Grace said calmly. "Get those ships to safety." "That is an order." The remaining fleet pulled back, and the Singapore turned to face the scourge alone. Grace opened a channel to Ben. "Sergeant, how are my civilians?" "10 minutes, ma'am," Ben replied. "We need 10 more minutes." "You will get it," Grace promised. "Tell them that when they come back up, there was a ship here that stood for them." The Singapore charged directly at the scourge, all weapons firing. She was one ship against an endless enemy, and she did not care. Her crew worked with mechanical precision, years of training taking over where fear tried to break through. They fired until the barrels glowed red. They fired until the ammunition ran dry. They fired until the shields failed, and the hull began to tear, and they bought 10 minutes. Ben's voice came through one last time. "Commander, all civilians secure. You can pull out now." "Negative, Sergeant," Grace said as sparks rained down in her bridge. "I am staying as long as this ship stays in one piece." "You hold that colony. Ma'am, you are going to die." Grace smiled. "We all are eventually. At least I get to die for something that matters." Okonkwo out. The Singapore's engines exploded, but not before the remaining fleet returned. 21 ships, battered and burning, came back for their commander. They pulled the Singapore out of the scourge's grasp and jumped away, leaving Outpost Talus to its fate. As they fled into faster-than-light travel, Grace looked back at the tactical display. The scourge consumed the colony, but the shelters held. 40,000 people survived 3 kilometers underground, exactly where Ben and his Marines stood guard. Humanity had lost 16 ships and 3,000 crew. But they had saved 40,000 lives, and somewhere in that darkness, the scourge had learned something new. That some prey fought back? The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy within 6 hours. Not through official channels or government communications, but through the refugee networks, the traders, the civilian bands that connected billions of displaced people across hundreds of light years. Someone had recorded the battle at Outpost Talus, and now everyone was watching humanity make its stand. Quinn watched it for the 7th time in his cramped ship cabin. He was an amphibious trader, 6 limbs built for swimming through the methane seas of his homeworld, now cramped into a vessel designed for species that breathed oxygen. He had fled when the evacuation orders came, loading his cargo ship with as many refugees as it could hold and running for the outer rim. It had seemed like the smart thing to do. The only thing to do, but now he watched these humans, these strange mammals who had barely discovered faster-than-light travel, charging toward certain death. He watched their ships break apart, protecting people they had never met. He watched Commander Okonkwo refuse to abandon her position even as her vessel tore itself to pieces. "They are insane," his co-pilot said. "A young aquatic named Fina. No rational species would do this." Quinn did not answer. He was too busy calculating fuel costs and supply requirements. His ship was already 3 days out from the nearest human position. But if he turned around now, burned hard, and cut through the Veritas Nebula instead of going around it, he could reach their defensive line in 5 days. "Quinn, what are you doing?" Fina asked as she watched him input the new course. "Something stupid," Quinn replied. Or maybe something smart. I have not decided yet. David Torres had never expected to be a soldier. He was an engineer, someone who fixed atmospheric processors and recycling systems on the orbital stations around Earth. His wife had called him the night the evacuation was announced, begging him not to volunteer. He had promised her he would not. Then he had watched the broadcast from Talos, seen what Grace Okonkwo and her crew had done, and broken that promise before the video finished playing. Now he stood in a military briefing room with 300 other civilians who had volunteered, former pilots, mechanics, doctors, teachers, and even a few artists, all of them ready to fight despite having no real military training. A grizzled officer named Williams addressed them. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Most of you will die. We have ships but not enough trained crews. We have weapons but not enough people who know how to fire them properly. What we do have is a lot of courage and a very short time to turn that courage into something useful. A woman next to David, someone who had identified herself as a shuttle pilot for a mining company, raised her hand. Sir, I can fly anything with an engine. What do you need me to fly? William smiled. It was a tired expression, but genuine. Everything. We need you to fly everything. The volunteers were divided into crash courses. David found himself learning weapons systems with a former schoolteacher and a xenobiologist. The training was brutal, condensed months of military education into days. But nobody complained. They had all seen what was coming, and they knew that every hour they trained was another hour they might survive. On the fourth day, David met a medic named Rhea. She was from a mammalian species with soft gray fur and large eyes adapted for low light. She had been working at a civilian hospital in the outer territories when the human fleet arrived. I need to understand, Rhea said as she taught David basic field medicine. Your species fights for others. You die for strangers. This is not normal behavior. David thought about his daughter, safe on Earth, living a normal life because people he had never met stood guard at humanity's borders. Maybe not normal, he said, but it is necessary. If nobody stands up, then we all fall down. Rhea's ears flattened against her head, a sign of distress in her species. I am trained to heal, not to fight. But I watch your people, and I think maybe healing is also fighting. Fighting to save instead of fighting to destroy. Exactly, David said. Will you join us? She did not answer immediately. Then slowly she nodded. I will join your medical teams. If humans can stand for strangers, then I can heal strangers. It is the same courage, just expressed differently. The defensive line that humanity established became known simply as the Wall. 3 star systems fortified with every ship, every weapon, every defensive satellite that could be built or borrowed. Grace had recovered from her injuries at Talos and now commanded the entire operation from a repurposed mining station that served as their headquarters. The Wall held for 6 weeks. Ships from other species began arriving with supplies, weapons, and technical support, though they stopped short of committing their own military forces. It was help. But it was also a reminder that humanity still stood alone. Then Quinn arrived. His cargo ship was small and beat up, held together with spare parts and optimism. He landed at the main station and requested an immediate meeting with Grace. Security tried to turn him away, but he insisted until someone finally brought him to her office. Commander Okonkwo. My name is Quinn, he said, all 6 limbs gesturing in what his species considered a formal greeting. I am a merchant. I have no military training. I have no weapons worth mentioning. But I have a ship, and I know these trade routes better than anyone. If you can teach me how to fight, I will stay. Grace studied him carefully. Why? You already evacuated? You are safe. I was safe, Quinn corrected. Then I watched your people die for 40,000 strangers, and I realized safety was not the same as living. I cannot run away while others stand. It makes me feel like I have already died, just in a cowardly way. Grace smiled and extended her hand. Quinn awkwardly grasped it with one of his limbs, trying to imitate the human gesture. Welcome to the Wall, Quinn. We will teach you everything we know. Within days more arrived. A handful at first, then dozens. Young aliens who had watched the broadcasts and could not live with themselves if they did nothing. Old veterans who remembered what it meant to fight for something that mattered. Civilians who brought supplies and skills even if they could not bring weapons. David found himself working alongside an insectoid engineer named Krill, teaching the alien how to maintain the human weapons systems. They communicated through translation devices and hand gestures, but the work got done. In the evenings, they would share food, each trying the other's cuisine and trying not to make disgusted faces at the strange textures and flavors. "You humans have a saying," Krill said one night, "about strength in numbers." "Many hands make light work," David offered. "Yes, that one. I think maybe it is true. Alone, we are all weak. But together, maybe we are strong enough." Ambassador Neil Barrett watched the wall grow from his position back at the abandoned assembly station. He had remained behind to coordinate supplies and relay intelligence, but his real job had become something else entirely. He had become the voice explaining humanity's choice to a galaxy that still did not understand it. Talos contacted him weekly, asking for updates and offering condolences for the losses. The avian speaker had arranged for supply shipments from the Assembly's reserve stocks, though he still refused to send military support. "Neil, I must ask again," Talos said during their latest call. "What does humanity hope to gain from this? You cannot defeat the scourge. You cannot even slow it significantly. You are simply dying in a slightly more organized fashion." "We gain time," Neil replied. "Time for refugees to escape. Time to study the enemy. Time to develop new technologies. Time to inspire others to stand with us. Inspiration does not stop the scourge." "Maybe not," Neil agreed. "But inspiration brought Quinn and 24 other ships to the wall last week. It brought doctors like Rhea who are saving lives. It brought engineers like David who are building weapons we never imagined. Talos, we may not be able to defeat the scourge alone, but we are not alone anymore." Talos was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that the translator struggled with before settling on. "You are teaching the galaxy something it forgot. I'm not sure if that makes you heroes or fools." "Can we be both?" Neil asked with humanity. Apparently yes. Back at the wall, Grace assembled her command staff for a strategic meeting. Her force had grown to 57 ships, a mix of human vessels and the volunteers who had arrived over the past weeks. It was still nothing compared to the Scourge, but it was 3 times larger than what she had started with. "The Scourge is adapting," she told them. "It is learning our tactics and adjusting. We need something new, something it has not seen before." A human scientist named Walter raised his hand. He was old, well past retirement age, but he had volunteered immediately when the call went out. "Commander, I think I have something, but you are not going to like it." "I already do not like anything about this situation," Grace said. "What do you have?" Walter pulled up a holographic display. "We have been studying the Scourge's coordination patterns. It moves like a swarm, but there is structure underneath. I think we can disrupt that structure with specific energy frequencies. I call it firebreak technology. Will it stop them?" someone asked. "No," Walter said honestly, "but it will slow them down. Maybe enough to matter." Grace looked at the plans, the calculations, the potential cost in lives and resources. Then she looked at her crew, human and alien alike, all of them ready to try. "Build it," she ordered. "Build it fast." The galaxy was watching, and slowly, impossibly, it was beginning to hope. 3 months into the war, the medical station orbiting the wall's central defensive position looked more like a small city than a hospital. Rhea moved through the crowded corridors, treating injuries that ranged from simple burns to trauma that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Human, alien, military, and civilian all mixed together in the recovery wards. United by their shared sacrifice, Neil had come to visit the wounded. Something he did every week despite his responsibilities at the coordination center. He watched Rhea work with quiet efficiency, her small hands surprisingly steady as she treated a human pilot who had lost his left arm during the last engagement. "You are doing important work here," Neil said when Rhea finally took a break. She looked exhausted. Her gray fur was matted with sweat, and her large eyes had dark circles that no amount of rest seemed to fix. "I save bodies, Ambassador, but I cannot save minds. These people have seen things that will never leave them." "None of us will leave this unchanged," Neil agreed. "But that is the cost. We knew it would be high." A young pilot named Lena Frost sat nearby, her head bandaged and her right eye covered with medical gauze. She had been shot down during a scouting run and barely made it back alive. It was her fourth ship, and she was only 26 years old? "Ambassador," Lena called out, "is it true that more volunteers are arriving?" 12 ships arrived yesterday, Neil confirmed, including a young avian who should not be here at all. Lena managed a tired smile. "Let me guess. Someone's son decided Daddy's orders did not matter?" "Speaker Talas's son, actually," Neil said. "His name is Kip. He arrived with 11 other young aliens, all of them demanding to join the defense fleet. Grace is trying to figure out what to do with them." Down in the flight deck, Grace was having that exact conversation. Kip stood before her, his golden feathers bright against the gray metal of the station. He was young, barely adult by avian standards, and he vibrated with nervous energy. "I want to fight," Kip said. "I have flight training. I can follow orders. I can help." "You can also get killed," Grace replied. "Does your father know you are here?" "He will figure it out eventually," Kip said. "But by then, I will already be trained and useful." "You cannot send me back?" Grace wanted to argue, but the truth was she needed every pilot she could get. The human forces had taken brutal casualties over the past months. Half her original fleet was gone, replaced by volunteers and hastily trained civilians. She could use someone with real flight training, even if that someone was the speaker's rebellious son. "You get one chance," Grace said. "You follow orders exactly. You train harder than anyone else. You prove you can survive. If you do those things, you can stay. But if I think you are a liability, I'm putting you on the first transport home." "Understood?" Kip's wings spread wide in an avian gesture of acceptance. "Understood, Commander." Grace assigned Kip to Lena's squadron once the pilot recovered from her injuries. Lena was not thrilled about babysitting the speaker's son, but she understood why Grace made the choice. If Kip was going to learn, he needed to learn from someone who had survived long enough to know all the tricks. "Rule 1, Lena told him on their first training flight. "The Scourge does not care about your species, your rank, or your famous father. It will kill you just as quickly as anyone else. Faster, probably because you are new and new means mistakes." "I understand," Kip said, his translator rendering his clicks and chirps into standard language. "Rule 2, Lena continued. You do not need to be brave. You need to be smart. Brave pilots die in glorious explosions. Smart pilots go home and fight again tomorrow." "But humans are brave," Kip protested. "All the recordings show human pilots fighting even when they should retreat." Lena laughed, though it held no humor. "We are terrified, Kip, every single flight, every single engagement. But we fight anyway because someone has to. That is not bravery. That is stubbornness." They ran drill after drill, practicing evasive maneuvers, attack patterns, and emergency protocols. Kip was a natural flyer, his lightweight frame perfect for the quick turns and sudden accelerations that human tactics required. Within 2 weeks, he could keep up with the veterans. Within 3 weeks, he was teaching the other alien volunteers tricks that only avian pilots knew back at the medical station. Walter finally finished the first prototype of his firebreak technology. He presented it to Grace with the enthusiasm of a professor showing off a favorite project and the nervousness of a man who knew his invention would send people into danger. "It is not a weapon," Walter explained. "It is more like a disruption field. The Scourge coordinates through some kind of biological signal. Similar to how beehives or ant colonies work on Earth, this device interferes with that signal, creating confusion and slowing their response time." "How much does it slow them?" Grace asked. In laboratory conditions against samples, we recovered about 30%. In real combat conditions, who knows? Could be more, could be less. Could get people killed if they rely on it too much. Grace studied the device. It was small, roughly the size of a backpack, and could be mounted on a ship or carried by ground forces. We need to test it in real conditions. I will take a small strike force into contested territory and see if it works. Commander, let me come with you, Ben said. The sergeant had been listening from the doorway, his arm still in a sling from the tailless operation. If this thing works on the ground, my Marines need to know how to use it. 3 days later, Grace led a strike force of 8 ships into a system the Scourge had partially consumed. Ben and his Marines deployed to a damaged space station. Carrying Walter's firebreak devices and a whole lot of hope, the Scourge appeared within minutes, drawn to their presence like predators smelling blood. Grace's ships engaged immediately, using their practiced hit-and-run tactics. But this time, Walter's devices activated. Bathing the area in invisible energy waves, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The Scourge, which normally moved with coordinated precision, suddenly became clumsy. Individual pieces crashed into each other. Attack patterns fell apart. Response times increased by precious seconds that gave the human ships room to breathe. "It works," someone shouted over the communication channel. "Do not celebrate yet," Grace warned. "Keep moving. Stay focused." Ben's Marines held the station's entrance while civilian survivors evacuated. The Scourge ground forces, normally terrifying in their coordination, stumbled and hesitated under the firebreak's influence. It did not stop them, but it gave the Marines the advantage they needed. "This is like fighting drunk enemies," one Marine said. "They are still dangerous, but they are slow." "Then shoot them before they sober up," Ben replied. Firing controlled bursts at the approaching mass. The evacuation succeeded. Every civilian on that station made it out alive. The strike force returned to the wall with proof that Walter's invention worked and detailed combat data on how to use it effectively. That night, Grace authorized mass production of firebreak devices. Within a week, every ship and every ground unit had one. Within 2 weeks, the galaxy's manufacturing centers, responding to Ambassador Neal's diplomatic pressure, began producing their own versions using Walter's specifications. The Scourge was still winning, still consuming worlds, still pushing forward. But for the first time since the war began, they were fighting at a disadvantage. Kip's squadron ran their first real combat mission on a quiet morning, if there was such a thing as quiet during a war. Lena led them into a contested asteroid field to harass a Scourge formation that was threatening a refugee convoy. "Remember your training," Lena said as they approached. "We hit fast, we hit hard, and we get out before they surround us." The squadron dove into combat, and Kip felt his heart race as he fired his first shots in anger. The Scourge returned fire, and suddenly the training simulations seemed very far away. His wingman, a human pilot named Harris, took a hit and started spinning out of control. "Kip, stay in formation," Lena ordered, but Kip saw Harris struggling to regain control, saw a Scourge tendril moving to finish the wounded ship. He broke formation and dove toward his wingman, firing everything he had at the approaching threat. The Scourge tendril recoiled, and Harris managed to restart his engines. Both pilots climbed back to the squadron's position, where Lena was waiting with a lecture prepared. "You broke formation," she said over the private channel. "I saved Harris," Kip replied. "You risked the entire squadron," Lena countered. Then she paused. "But you also saved Harris. That was very human of you. Is that a compliment or an insult?" "With humans, it is always both." They returned to base with everyone alive and 2 confirmed Scourge kills. Commander Okonkwo reviewed the mission footage and called Kip to her office. "You are a natural pilot," Grace said. "But more importantly, you are learning to think like we do. You saw someone in trouble and you helped, even though it meant breaking protocol." "I thought I would be punished," Kip admitted. "In most military forces, you would be," Grace agreed. "But humanity's strength has never been following rules. It has been knowing when to break them for the right reasons. You made the right call." Welcome to the real fight, Kip. That evening, Kip sent a message to his father. It was short and direct. Father, I know you are angry. I know you think I am foolish, but I have found something here worth fighting for. The humans taught me that sometimes running away is the same as giving up. I cannot do that anymore. I hope someday you will understand. Talos received the message in his sanctuary on the outer rim. He read it 3 times, his feathers shifting through colors that expressed emotions too complex for translation. Then, he archived the message and returned to his work coordinating refugee settlements. But that night, for the first time since the evacuation began, he watched the footage from the wall. He watched his son fly alongside humans. He watched mixed species crews working together. He watched Quinn the merchant firing weapons he barely understood. He watched civilians becoming soldiers and soldiers becoming heroes. And Speaker Talos began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, his son had made the right choice after all. 6 months into the war, the defensive network humanity called the Wall had become something nobody expected. What started as a desperate last stand had evolved into a true, multi-species coalition spanning 4 star systems and defended by nearly 200 ships from 40 different worlds. Ambassador Neil stood in the new coordination center, watching real-time tactical displays from a dozen different battle zones. Amy Chung, a young communications officer who somehow kept track of 50 different species all trying to talk at once, managed the chaos with practiced efficiency. Ambassador, we have incoming transmission from the Confederacy fleet, Amy said. Commander Ron is requesting permission to dock. Neil felt his eyebrows rise. Ron, the reptilian commander who had voted for evacuation and disappeared to the Outer Rim 6 months ago, was coming back. Grant permission. And Amy, let Commander Okonkwo know we have a significant arrival. Ron's battle group emerged from faster-than-light travel 2 hours later. It was not the entire Confederacy fleet, but it was substantial. 27 warships, proper military vessels with trained crews and heavy weapons. More firepower than humanity had started with. Grace met Ron at the docking bay. The reptilian commander looked older than she remembered, his scales faded and his movements slower. He approached with his head lowered, a gesture of shame in his culture. Commander Okonkwo, Ron said. I do not expect forgiveness. I ran when I should have stayed. I left you to face the scourge alone. You are here now, Grace said simply. That is what matters. How can you say that? Ron asked, genuine confusion in his voice. I abandoned you. My fleet could have made a difference in those early battles. Grace gestured at the coordination center, where human and alien crews worked side by side. If you had stayed 6 months ago, you would have been here out of duty. Now you are here by choice. That makes you more valuable, not less. Welcome to the Wall, Commander Ron. Ron straightened, his scales shifting to a brighter color. My fleet and my experience are yours to command. Tell me where you need us. That same day, an unexpected guest arrived at the coordination center. Nyx, a hive queen from an insectoid species that communicated through pheromones and barely understood individual thinking, had brought her entire brood to study human tactics. Explain the impossible, Nyx said through her translator, her thousands of compound eyes fixed on Grace. You fight as individuals, yet coordinate like a hive. You have no shared mind, yet move with singular purpose. How? Grace smiled. We call it trust. Each person makes their own choices, but we all choose to work toward the same goal. Inefficient, Nyx said. Each individual could betray the whole. They could, Grace agreed, but they do not. That is what makes it strong. Nyx studied the tactical displays, watching human ships coordinate with alien vessels across light years of space. Her translator struggled to render her response, finally settling on, Teach me this trust. My hive's coordination might enhance your individual actions. Over the next weeks, Nyx worked with the Coalition's tactical teams. Her species understood swarm patterns in ways that individual thinkers could not, seeing connections and movements that seemed random to others. When combined with human improvisation and alien technology, the result was devastating. The Coalition ran its first major test during an engagement near a refugee processing station. The Scourge appeared in force, a massive tendril of their central mass intent on consuming the facility and the 30,000 civilians inside. Grace coordinated the defense from her flagship. All ships implement formation NIC 7. Human vessels take point positions. Confederacy ships provide heavy fire support. All other vessels follow the designated movement patterns exactly. The battle unfolded like a deadly dance. Human ships darted forward, using firebreak technology to disrupt Scourge coordination. The moment the enemy hesitated, Confederacy heavy weapons opened fire from protected positions. Meanwhile, ships from 24 other species executed a complex movement pattern designed by NICs, creating overlapping fields of fire that caught the Scourge in a web of destruction. For the first time since the war began, the Scourge retreated. The communication channels erupted in celebration. Ships that had never fought together had just coordinated a victory. But Grace cut through the noise with her command voice. Celebrate later. Secure the station now. Wounded vessels fall back for repairs. Fresh ships move up. Stay alert. Ben's Marines boarded the refugee station to assess damage. He found the facility manager, an elderly alien named Torin, directing repair crews with calm efficiency, despite the fact that his species had 4 arms and Torin was down to 2 after debris struck him during the battle. You held the interior defenses, Ben said. That helped us protect the exterior. Torin clicked his mandibles in what might have been a laugh. 6 months ago, I was a bureaucrat who processed refugee applications. Now, I am a station commander who fought the Scourge. You humans have strange influences on people. We just show what is possible, Ben replied. You are the ones who choose to be brave. Back at the Coordination Center, Walter presented his latest discovery to a gathered assembly of scientists from a dozen species. He looked even older than before, the stress of constant work aging him visibly, but his eyes sparkled with excitement. We have been studying the recovered Scourge fragments, Walter explained, and we found something extraordinary. The Scourge is not just a mindless swarm. There is intelligence behind it, a central controlling presence. Where? Ron demanded. We do not know exactly, Walter admitted, but we know it exists. And if we can find it, if we can destroy it, the entire Scourge might collapse. The implications spread through the room like fire. For 6 months, they had been fighting a defensive war, slowing the enemy and saving who they could. But this was a chance to actually win. Grace studied the data carefully. How certain are you? 70%, Walter said. Maybe 80. The coordination patterns are too complex to be purely instinctual. Something is directing them. Then we find it, Grace said, and we kill it. Neil opened a secure channel to the Galactic Assembly's refugee government. Tallis appeared on the screen, looking surprised to hear from the human ambassador. Neil, is everything all right? Do you need more supplies? We need more than supplies, Neil said. We need the Assembly to authorize a full military operation. We have found a way to potentially end the Scourge threat, but it will require resources beyond what we have. Tallis's feathers shifted to colors that Neil had learned meant skepticism. The Assembly will never approve offensive operations. We are not fighters. That is why we left. Then ask them to reconsider, Neil said quietly. Because in 2 months, we are going on the offensive whether the Assembly helps or not. We have proven the Scourge can be fought. We have proven species can stand together. Now we need to prove it can be beaten. Will you help us? The channel fell silent for a long moment. Then Tallis said, I will bring it to a vote. But Neil, I cannot promise anything. I know, but Tallis, your son is here. Kip has flown 30 combat missions. He has saved lives and taken risks that would terrify most trained soldiers. He learned that from us, but the courage was already inside him. It is inside all of you. You just need a reason to find it. After the call ended, Tallis sat in his office, staring at the empty screen. His assistant, Pip, entered carrying reports. The young avian had matured over the past months, taking on more responsibilities as the refugee government struggled to maintain order across scattered colonies. Sir, the daily briefing is ready, Pip said. Pip, do you think we made a mistake? Tallis asked suddenly. When we evacuated, when we left the humans to fight alone, was that the right choice? Pip considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, I thought it was the only choice. We could not fight the scourge, we could only run. And now? Now I have watched the broadcasts every day. I have seen humans die for strangers. I have seen my friend Kip become a warrior. I have seen 40 species learn to work together because humans showed them it was possible. Pip's feathers ruffled. I think maybe we made the safe choice, but not the right choice. Tallis nodded slowly. Prepare an emergency assembly session. Tell every representative it is mandatory attendance. If humanity wants to take this fight to the scourge, then it is time the galaxy decided whether to stand with them or remain in shame. At the wall, David worked alongside Krill in the engineering bay, assembling weapons components for the upcoming offensive. They had become close friends over the months, learning each other's languages and customs. David taught Krill about human music. Krill taught David about insectoid philosophy. David, can I ask something personal? Krill said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Sure, friend. Why do you fight? You are an engineer, not a soldier. You have a family on Earth? You could have stayed safe? David set down the component he was working on. I fight because if I stayed safe while others suffered, I could not look my daughter in the eye anymore. What kind of father would I be if I taught her that safety matters more than doing what is right? But you might die. I might, David agreed. But if I die protecting others, then I die as someone my daughter can be proud of. That matters more than living as a coward. Krill was quiet for a moment. Then he said, humans are very strange. But I think maybe the galaxy needed strange. That night, Lena gathered her squadron for a briefing. Kip sat among the other pilots, his golden feathers now scarred from close calls and his eyes carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much death. We have new orders, Lena said. Command is planning a major offensive. We are going to hunt the Scourge's central intelligence and destroy it. When? Someone asked. 6 weeks, maybe 8. They are still finalizing the plan. Lena looked at each pilot in turn. This is going to be the most dangerous mission any of us have flown. Casualties will be high. Command is not ordering anyone to go. This is volunteer only. Every hand went up immediately. Human, avian, reptilian, insectoid, aquatic. Every pilot volunteered without hesitation. Kip stood. Commander Frost, 6 months ago, I came here thinking I knew what courage meant. I thought it was about not being afraid. But you taught me that courage is being afraid and doing it anyway. We are all afraid, but we are also all standing up. Thank you for that lesson. Lena felt tears in her eyes but blinked them away. Thank you for learning it, Kip. Thank you all for learning it. The galaxy was preparing for its biggest gamble. 40 species, 200 ships, and thousands of soldiers who had learned to stand together, the final assault force assembled. In the darkness between stars, 200 ships holding position in a silence that felt heavier than any noise. Grace stood on the bridge of her flagship, now a proper dreadnought gifted by the Assembly after Tallis's passionate speech convinced them to commit resources. Around her, display screens showed the positions of every vessel in the Coalition fleet. Humans, reptilians, avians, insectoids, aquatics, and 36 other species, all waiting for the order. All ships report ready, Amy said from her communications station. She had not slept properly in 4 days, coordinating the logistics of the largest multi-species military operation in galactic history. Good, Grace said. She opened a fleet-wide channel. This is Commander Okonkwo to all vessels. In a few minutes, we jump to the target coordinates. Intelligence suggests the Scourge's central hive is located in the Daros system, buried in what used to be a gas giant. We hit it with everything we have, punch through to the core, and destroy the intelligence coordinating the entire Scourge network. She paused, looking at the faces of her bridge crew, human and alien working side by side. 6 months ago, humanity stood alone. We chose to fight because running meant abandoning people who needed help. We did not know if anyone would stand with us. But you did. Every species represented in this fleet made the choice to stop running and start fighting. Whatever happens today, know that you have already won. The scourge made you afraid, but you found your courage anyway. That is the victory that matters. Ron's voice came through on a private channel. Grace, it has been an honor serving beside humanity. If we do not survive this, I want you to know that my people will remember what you taught us. We will survive, Grace said firmly. And we will teach the galaxy that some fights are worth having. The fleet jumped together, emerging in the Darrow system in a coordinated wave. The sight that greeted them would haunt nightmares for generations. The gas giant was gone, consumed and reformed into a massive organic structure that pulsed with sickly light. Scourge vessels, if they could be called vessels, swarmed around it like flies around rotting meat. Firebreak devices active, Walter reported from his position in the science bay. Broadcasting on all frequencies. The effect was immediate, but not as dramatic as they had hoped. The scourge swarm stuttered and slowed, but they did not stop. There were too many, and they were too close to their central intelligence. All ships, attack pattern Delta 9, Grace ordered. Nix, coordinate the swarm formation. Ron, your heavy vessels open fire on the hive structure. Human ships, we are running interference. The battle began with a violence that defied description. The coalition fleet dove into the swarm like a spear, with human vessels at the tip absorbing the worst of the enemy fire. Lena's squadron led the vanguard, their fighters weaving through impossible spaces to draw enemy attention. This is insane! Harris shouted over the communication line as his ship barely dodged a scourge projectile. Good, Lena replied. They will not expect insane. Kip, stay on my wing. Everyone else, remember your training. The fighters danced through death, using every trick they had learned over 6 months of desperate combat. Kip flew with a precision that would have made his father proud, his movements fluid and controlled despite the chaos. On the ground team, Ben led a boarding party toward the hive's surface. They had one job: plant David's weapon deep enough to matter. The weapon, officially called the Defiant Dawn, was Walter's firebreak technology scaled up 1,000 times. If it worked, it would scramble every scourge coordination signal in the system. 30 seconds to landing, Ben said. His Marines prepared their equipment, human and alien side by side. Rhea was with them, because wounded were guaranteed and someone needed to keep them alive. They hit the hive's surface hard, cutting through organic matter with plasma torches. The scourge did not defend in any conventional way. Instead, the hive itself tried to consume them, walls closing in and strange tendrils reaching out. Keep moving, Ben ordered. David, how deep do we need to go? David, wearing an engineering suit not designed for combat, checked his readings. Another 100 meters. The central coordination node should be right below us. They dug deeper, fighting the hive's attempts to seal the wound they were creating. Rhea treated burns and cuts as they occurred, working with speed born of 6 months of battlefield medicine. Finally, they reached a chamber that pulsed with light that hurt to look at directly. This is it, David said. Everyone back. I need to calibrate the device. In space, Grace's fleet was taking heavy casualties. Ships broke apart under sustained fire. Entire squadrons vanished in sudden explosions. But they pressed forward, driven by 6 months of shared sacrifice and the knowledge that this was their only chance. A voice suddenly filled every communication channel. It was not words, not exactly, but meaning translated directly into thought. Why do you resist? Why do you not run? The scourge's central intelligence was trying to understand. Grace answered, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Because some things are worth protecting. Because running means letting you win. Because we are not prey, we are not food, and we will not submit. You will die. Probably, Grace agreed. But you will die first. David activated the Defiant Dawn. The device hummed with power, building toward a release that would either save them all or kill everyone in the chamber. He thought of his daughter, safe on Earth, and hoped she would understand why he had to do this. The device fired. Energy exploded outward from the hive's core, a wave of disruption that scrambled every scourge signal for thousands of kilometers. The swarm faltered, ships drifted. The coordination that made them deadly simply stopped. All ships, concentrate fire on the hive structure, Grace ordered, now while they are confused. The Coalition fleet poured everything they had into the massive organic construct. Missiles, energy weapons, kinetic rounds, and Ron's heavy plasma cannons. The hive shuddered, cracked, and began to collapse. Ben grabbed David and ran for the extraction point. Move, move, move! This whole thing is coming down! They barely made it to the transport as the chamber behind them imploded. Rhea helped load the wounded while Ben did a head count. Everyone had made it. Somehow, impossibly, everyone had survived. The hive collapsed in on itself, pulling the surrounding Scourge vessels with it. Grace watched the readings as the massive structure tore itself apart. When it finally exploded, the shockwave rippled through the entire system, and then silence. The Scourge ships that remained drifted aimlessly, no longer coordinated or directed. They were still dangerous, but they were no longer an unstoppable force. Did we win? Someone asked over the fleet channel. Grace looked at her tactical display. 43 ships lost. Thousands dead, but the Scourge was broken, leaderless, and vulnerable. Yes, she said, yes, we won. The fleet erupted in celebration, but Grace felt too tired to join in. She had won, but the cost was written in every casualty report. Neil's voice came through on a private channel. Grace, the Assembly is receiving reports from all across the galaxy. The Scourge is in retreat everywhere. It is over. No, Grace said quietly. It is just beginning. Now comes the hard part, rebuilding, healing, learning to live with what we have done. But we survived, Neil said. Against all odds, we stood and survived. 3 months later, Neil stood at a memorial built on the ruins of Outpost Talus. The colony had been reclaimed, the refugees returned, and a monument erected to honor everyone who had stood at the wall. Names from 40 species covered the memorial, thousands upon thousands of them. Grace joined him, walking with a cane now. The battle had left her with injuries that would never fully heal. Too many names, she said. But they mattered, Neil replied. Every single one mattered. Talus arrived with an official delegation from the Assembly. Kip walked beside his father, wearing the medals he had earned in combat. The reunion had been difficult, but they were working on understanding each other. Ambassador Barrett, Commander Okonkwo, Talus said formally. The Assembly has asked me to present you with the highest honors we can bestow. You taught the galaxy what courage looks like? We just did what needed doing, Grace said. Exactly, Talus replied. That is why you are heroes. Children played near the memorial, dozens of species mixing freely. Pip, now a junior ambassador, watched them with a smile. They will grow up in a galaxy we made safe for them. That is worth everything we paid. David stood with his daughter, who had traveled from Earth to see where her father had fought. She was young, but old enough to understand that he had done something important. Daddy, were you scared? She asked. Every day, David admitted. But being scared and doing the right thing anyway, that is what courage is. Quinn had returned to trading, but his ship now carried supplies for rebuilding efforts rather than fleeing refugees. He stopped by the memorial and placed a small token at its base, a tradition from his people for honoring the dead. Rhea had opened a hospital that treated all species equally. Ben helped her run it when his military duties allowed. They had both seen enough war to last several lifetimes. Lena trained the next generation of pilots, teaching them the tactics that had kept her alive. Her students came from dozens of worlds, all of them eager to learn from the squadron that had led the final assault. Walter continued his research, but now he focused on peaceful applications of the technology he had developed. He was old, tired, and haunted by the weapons he had created, but he worked to make amends. As the ceremony concluded, Neil looked at the memorial and then at the people gathered around it. Humans who had refused to run. Aliens who had learned to stand. All of them together, united by shared sacrifice. We changed the galaxy, Grace said quietly. No, Neil corrected. We reminded the galaxy what it could be. The courage was always there. We just had to show them it was worth finding. The sun set over Outpost Talus, casting long shadows across the memorial. But tomorrow the sun would rise again on a galaxy that had learned a simple but vital lesson. Some fights are worth having. Some people are worth protecting. And sometimes the smallest voices can inspire the greatest courage. All species ran, but humanity stood and fought back. And in doing so, they taught the galaxy to stand with them. The war was over. The healing had begun. And the future, bought with blood and sacrifice, stretched out before them full of possibility.